On the night of April 4th, 2019, a respected pastor was shot multiple times inside his own apartment. His wife was hit by gunfire too. The shooter didn't run, she didn't try to hide, and she didn't claim it was an accident. Instead, she remained inside the apartment waiting for police to arrive. At first glance, it seemed like an open and shut murder case. Our thoughts remain with everyone whose lives were forever changed by the events of this case. Behind the headlines, courtroom testimony, and public debate are real people who continue to live with the consequences long after the story leaves the news cycle. The death of Brodus Perry, the injuries suffered by Tabitha Perry, and the choices made by Latasha Daniels created a tragedy that affected countless families, friends, and members of their community. No verdict can undo what happened, and no sentence can fully heal the wounds left behind. This is True Crime Diaries, where we explore the facts, the evidence, and the human stories behind some of the most compelling criminal cases. If you find this deep dive informative, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories that go beyond the headlines. Today, we're diving into one of the most shocking cases involving a church leader in recent years, the murder of Pastor Brodus Perry. And trust me, the further we go into this story, the more unbelievable it gets. To understand what happened, we need to start in Collierville, Tennessee. If you've never heard of Collierville, it's a quiet and relatively affluent suburb located just outside Memphis. It's the kind of place where families move for good schools, safe neighborhoods, and a strong sense of community. A woman had driven nearly 3 hours across state lines, purchased a handgun just hours before the shooting, and ended the life of a church leader in front of his wife. But the deeper investigators looked into this case, the stranger it became. Because the woman who pulled the trigger wasn't a stranger. She wasn't a random criminal. And according to what would later come out in court, she wasn't even an enemy. She was someone who had once trusted Pastor Brodus Perry more than almost anyone else. What started as a counseling relationship would allegedly evolve into a secret affair, hidden messages, emotional dependency, and a chain of events that ended with a fatal confrontation. And by the time everything was revealed, people weren't just debating who committed the murder. They were debating what really caused it. Crime isn't something residents expect to see making national headlines, which is exactly why this case stunned so many people. When news broke that a pastor had been gunned down inside an apartment complex, people struggled to make sense of it. Who would want to kill a pastor, and why? At the center of the story was 36-year-old Brodus Perry. To many people, Perry represented the image of a modern church leader. He was charismatic, well-spoken, active in ministry.
You should be a witness. You are a testimony.
And then asked Brodus what he did, and so I'm, connected with assimilation in young adults. And I said, well, I work with the young adults too. And so kind of from that, that was kind of our first connection.
We know that the gospel saves. We know that the gospel strengthens. We know that the gospel sustains, but the gospel also unifies us.
That's right.
And I think that's what we need to, not just as young adults, but I think that's ultimately what we need to do as a church, to realize that the gospel unites us. It brings us together.
And according to people who knew him professionally, he had a promising future ahead of him. Just months before his death, he and his wife, Tabitha, had relocated to Tennessee after he accepted a position at a larger church in Memphis. From the outside, everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. New city, new opportunities, a growing ministry, a fresh chapter in life. But appearances can be deceiving, and in this case, they were. Because while Brodus was building a reputation as a respected pastor, another side of his life was allegedly unfolding behind closed doors, a side that very few people knew about. And according to testimony that would later emerge in court, that hidden world would eventually become the motive behind his murder. Around 10 p.m. on April 4th, gunshots shattered the quiet atmosphere of Meridian Park Apartments. Residents immediately began calling 911.
There was like 5 or 6 gunshots in the first kind of blast, and then there was a little bit of a delay, a woman screaming, and then I heard some more, like probably 5 more.
Police rushed to the scene without knowing exactly what they were walking into. When officers reached the apartment, they discovered a horrifying situation. Brodus Perry had been shot multiple times. His wife Tabitha had also been struck by gunfire. But perhaps the most shocking detail was that the suspected shooter was still there, inside the apartment, armed, waiting. Police identified the woman as Latasha Daniels, and according to reports, she appeared detached from what was happening around her. Officers repeatedly ordered her to drop her weapon. She didn't comply. The situation became so tense that authorities eventually used less lethal rounds to subdue her before taking her into custody. Only then did investigators begin trying to piece together what had happened. And almost immediately, they realized this wasn't a random act of violence. The people involved knew each other. Very well. Now here's where the story starts taking a dramatic turn. Latasha Daniels wasn't just another church member. She wasn't someone struggling on the margins of society. In fact, she had spent years helping other people solve their problems. Latasha held a doctorate in social work. She operated a behavioral health practice. She worked with individuals dealing with emotional and psychological challenges. On paper, she seemed like the last person anyone would expect to be charged with murder, which raises an obvious question. How does someone go from helping people heal to standing in an apartment holding a gun after killing a pastor? The answer, according to prosecutors and later testimony, stretches back years before the shooting. Back to Arkansas. Back to a church community where both Latasha and Brodus became acquainted. And back to what allegedly began as a counseling relationship. Before moving to Tennessee, Brodus Perry worked at a church in Little Rock, Arkansas. Part of his role involved helping members become more connected within the church community. He worked closely with different ministry groups and leadership programs. It was the kind of position that naturally brought him into contact with many people. One of those people was Latasha Daniels. At first, there was nothing unusual about their interactions. A pastor and a church member, a spiritual leader and someone seeking guidance. Perfectly normal, at least on the surface. But according to claims that would later emerge during court proceedings, things eventually became far more personal. And if those claims were true, the relationship crossed boundaries that should never have been crossed. According to testimony later presented in court, Latasha was experiencing serious difficulties in her personal life. Her marriage was reportedly falling apart. She was struggling emotionally, and she turned to someone she trusted for guidance, Pastor Brodus Perry, at least initially. But according to Latasha's version of events, their relationship eventually evolved beyond counseling, far beyond it. And if her claims were accurate, what followed would remain hidden for years, a secret that neither church members nor Brodus's wife knew anything about, at least not at the time. And that secret would eventually become the center of a murder trial that captivated public attention. Because what investigators were about to uncover wasn't simply a story about a shooting. It was a story about trust, manipulation, power, heartbreak, and a relationship that allegedly spiraled completely out of control. In many true crime cases, investigators are trying to answer one question: who did it? But in the murder of Brodus Perry, that question was answered almost immediately. The real mystery was why. Why would a respected mental health professional drive nearly 3 hours, walk into a pastor's apartment, and allegedly shoot him multiple times? The answer, according to testimony presented in court, centered around a relationship that had remained hidden from almost everyone. And the deeper people looked into that relationship, the more complicated it became. Before the shooting, Brodus Perry and Latasha Daniels had known each other for years through their church community in Arkansas. As I mentioned earlier, Latasha wasn't just a church member. She was highly educated, successful, respected in her own field. She operated a behavioral health practice and had built a reputation helping people navigate emotional and personal struggles. By all appearances, she had her life together. But behind the scenes, things weren't nearly as stable. According to court testimony, her marriage was deteriorating. She was dealing with emotional stress and uncertainty about her future. And during that difficult period, she turned to Brodus Perry for guidance. At least that's how it began. What happened after that would become one of the most disputed aspects of the entire case. According to Latasha's testimony, the relationship changed dramatically during counseling sessions. She claimed that what started as pastoral guidance eventually became romantic, then physical. And over time, she said, the relationship grew into a full-blown affair. And during that time, she said she became deeply emotionally invested. This wasn't someone she viewed as a temporary partner. According to her, she believed she had a future with him. And that's where the story starts becoming much darker. Because while she believed one version of reality, others around Brodus appeared to be hearing something completely different. One of the most shocking revelations to emerge after the shooting involved allegations surrounding what is often referred to as ethical non-monogamy. For those unfamiliar with the term, it's generally used to describe relationships in which all parties knowingly agree that romantic or intimate relationships can exist outside of a traditional monogamous structure. According to evidence discussed during the trial, Brodus participated in online discussions involving that lifestyle. And according to messages and videos later examined, he allegedly described his marriage as being open. He reportedly told others that his wife was aware of his relationships with other women. More importantly, he allegedly claimed she had accepted them, even approved of them.
About the past couple of weeks in terms of expanding, my ethical non-monogamy, and it's kind of so like, well, baby, I got a couple questions. I'm just curious, she knows about the group, everything like that. So I was like, when did you want to know? When did you want to know that there's someone who has my interest or someone who I would like to pursue? Do you want to know the moment that I feel like it's more than just banter? Do you want to know at the moment that I would like to begin to banter? Do you want to know once I feel like it might be a thing beyond banter? Or what? Because this is kind of new for us, right? Because, girlfriend, Tasha, that's easy. That's been 2 years. That's been it for the most part. So our heart knows that Doe Jackson, which is hometown for us, no exes, and no place in your current city. Those are the hard no's, right?
But here's where things become incredibly important, because another person in this story would later say none of that was true. And that person was Tabitha Perry. From the outside, Tabitha appeared to be living a normal married life. She and Brodus had moved to Tennessee together. They were building a future together. And as far as anyone knew, they were a typical husband and wife team serving in ministry. But after the shooting, investigators uncovered information that suggested there may have been a completely different reality hidden beneath the surface. According to testimony presented at trial, Tabitha stated that she had no knowledge of any affair, no knowledge of an open marriage, no knowledge of online discussions, and no knowledge of any romantic relationship between her husband and Latasha.
Prior to Mr. Perry's death, did you have any idea that the defendant and Mr. Perry were involved in any kind of an inappropriate relationship?
No.
Did Mr. Perry at any time have any conversation with you about he would like to have a relationship with Latasha Daniels?
No.
Did he at any time have a conversation with you about he wanted to have a relationship with anyone other than you, a sexual relationship with anyone other than you?
One time he told me about a book that he wanted me to read.
Right.
That was about the extent of it. Hey, I read this book. I think you should read it.
Did he tell you what it was about?
I think I've gathered what it was about, yeah.
What did you gather it was about?
I gathered that it was about people who are in open marriages.
And is that something that you were interested in?
No.
Think about that for a moment. If her testimony was accurate, then the reality she believed she was living shattered instantly the moment gunfire erupted inside her apartment. Because in a matter of seconds, she wasn't just learning that her husband had been shot. She was allegedly learning that he had been living a secret life she never knew existed. And that revelation would become one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the entire case. But the contradictions didn't stop there. According to evidence discussed during the trial, Brodus allegedly told different stories to different people. To some individuals, he reportedly described a marriage built on openness and honesty. To others, he suggested certain relationships needed to remain hidden. And according to Latasha's account, there were strict rules surrounding their interactions. Rules that she said governed almost every aspect of their relationship. If true, those rules created a situation where secrecy became normal. Communication allegedly occurred through disappearing message applications. Interactions were carefully controlled, and according to testimony, certain boundaries existed specifically to prevent others from discovering what was happening. Now, whether those rules reflected manipulation, mutual agreement, or something else entirely became a major point of debate during the trial. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The relationship wasn't nearly as straightforward as it first appeared. As months turned into years, Latasha's personal life reportedly continued changing. Her marriage eventually ended, and according to her testimony, she became increasingly focused on her relationship with Brodus. But there was a major problem. Despite everything she believed they shared, Brodus remained married. And according to evidence later presented in court, there was no indication he intended to leave his wife. That detail would become incredibly significant, because investigators eventually began asking whether disappointment, heartbreak, and emotional dependency had created a situation that was spiraling toward disaster, a disaster nobody could yet see coming. Now here's where I want you to keep a specific detail in mind, because it becomes extremely important later. Throughout the relationship, according to testimony, Latasha allegedly made significant emotional investments: time, energy, commitment. She reportedly believed the relationship was meaningful and long-term. But relationships built in secrecy often create very different expectations for the people involved. One person may see a future, the other may see something temporary, and when those expectations collide, the results can be devastating, especially when emotions have been building for years. By early 2019, Brodus and Tabitha had already relocated to Tennessee. The move created physical distance between Brodus and Latasha. According to Latasha's account, the relationship began deteriorating. The future she believed in seemed to be disappearing. Communication became strained. The connection she thought they shared appeared to be slipping away. And then came a message she claimed would change everything. According to her testimony, Brodus contacted her through a messaging application designed to automatically erase conversations after they were viewed. The message, she said, was clear. He no longer wanted to continue the relationship. Moments after she read it, the message disappeared forever. No screenshot, no saved copy, no record, just words that allegedly remained only in her memory. And according to her account, those words triggered an emotional collapse. What happened next would lead her to a sporting goods store, a handgun purchase, a drive across state lines, and eventually a deadly confrontation inside an apartment in Tennessee. Before we continue, let me know your thoughts. Do you believe a person can be manipulated into making a tragic decision? Or do you think every individual is ultimately responsible for their own actions, regardless of the circumstances? I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments.
Talk to him, Tasha. Just go let him see you. Go see why. And that's what I did. I just drove so I can see him face to face and hope that I can get something from him besides the fact that he broke up with me with a disappearing text. And as I was driving, he did text me, and as he was telling me that he still loved me. So I was trying to just figure out what was going on.
By the morning of April 4th, 2019, nobody around Brodus Perry had any reason to believe the day would end in tragedy. At around 4:30 p.m., surveillance cameras captured Latasha entering a sporting goods store in Arkansas. What happened next would later become a major point for prosecutors. She purchased a firearm, not days earlier, not weeks earlier, that same day. According to reports, she selected a Ruger EC 9S 9mm handgun along with ammunition. The purchase was completed using her credit card. Then she left. Simple, straightforward. Documented on surveillance video. From a prosecutor's perspective, this looked incredibly damaging. After all, if someone buys a gun and then, hours later, uses it in a fatal shooting, many people will naturally see a connection. But the defense would later argue something very different. According to Latasha's testimony, the gun was not originally intended for Brodus Perry. Instead, she claimed she bought it because she was planning to harm herself.
And he said, I think our time is up. So he had broke up with me via this disappearing text.
How did that make you feel?
I felt so used and worthless, and I just felt like trash. Like, who does that to somebody who they say that they love?
Did Brodus ask you about expanding the relationship beyond you?
He did.
When he asked you about that, how did you respond?
I told him I didn't want to.
Did he tell you, well, my wife's on board with it, so why isn't my girlfriend?
That's exactly what he said.
Whether jurors fully believed that explanation or not would become one of the central questions during the trial. After leaving the store, Latasha reportedly returned home briefly. Then she got into her vehicle and started driving. At this point, investigators knew where she ended up. The question was what she intended to do when she started the journey. According to her testimony, her original destination wasn't Tennessee at all. She claimed she intended to go to a park connected symbolically to painful relationships from her past, a place where she planned to end her own life. But somewhere during that drive, she said her plans changed. Instead of continuing toward the park, she noticed signs pointing toward Memphis. And according to her account, she made a different decision. She turned toward Tennessee, toward Brodus Perry, toward the man she claimed had broken her heart. By that evening, she had crossed state lines and arrived in the Memphis area. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. According to Latasha's testimony, she didn't immediately go to the apartment. Instead, she sought out Brodus first. Specifically, she went to a location she knew he frequently visited, a cigar lounge. And if her account is accurate, this meeting would become one of the final opportunities to prevent what happened next. According to her version of events, she encountered Brodus outside the establishment. At first, she didn't approach him directly. She claimed she followed rules that had existed throughout their relationship. Rules she said had been established long before that night. Eventually, however, the two spoke. Not for a few seconds, not for a quick exchange, but for an extended conversation. A conversation that would later become one of the most disputed parts of the case, because there were only two people present, and one of them didn't survive. According to Latasha, the discussion was emotional but productive. She testified that they reached an understanding, an agreement, and that Brodus supposedly agreed they would finally tell Tabitha the truth about their relationship. If that's what happened, it would mean the evening was moving toward honesty rather than violence. But there was a problem. Nobody could verify that conversation. The only surviving witness to it was Latasha herself, and prosecutors were deeply skeptical of her account. After the meeting ended, Latasha headed toward the apartment. Tabitha welcomed her inside. Tabitha reportedly recognized her from church connections in Arkansas. As far as she knew, this was a familiar face, someone she had met before, someone she trusted enough to invite into her home. The two women sat and talked. Casual conversation, everyday topics, nothing that suggested the nightmare waiting just around the corner. And all the while, according to testimony, Tabitha had absolutely no idea about the alleged relationship between Latasha and her husband. No idea why Latasha was really there. No idea that tensions had allegedly been building for years. Eventually, Brodus arrived home, and according to Latasha's testimony, his reaction immediately caught her attention. She claimed he didn't seem pleased to see her there, not in the way someone might expect after an emotional conversation. Instead, she testified that he appeared uncomfortable. This was the moment she realized something was wrong, because the man who had allegedly agreed to tell his wife the truth now seemed unwilling to follow through. At least that's how she interpreted it. The three sat together and talked. Normal conversation, nothing explosive, nothing dramatic, at least not on the surface. But beneath that calm interaction, emotions were allegedly building. Years of secrecy, years of expectations, years of conflicting realities, all converging in one room. As the evening continued, the visit eventually came to an end, or at least it appeared to. The group moved toward the apartment door. Everything seemed normal, routine, the kind of goodbye people exchange every day. Then, in an instant, everything changed. According to Tabitha's testimony, she was already near the doorway when she turned around. What she saw next would haunt her forever.
I walked to the door and I'm just giving this little spiel about not speeding in the area, just making small talk as we go to the door. I open the door and I go out. We're on the second floor and I'm like right at the steps when I turned back and I'm like, okay, no one's behind me. And then I see her pull out her gun and start shooting.
Was she inside of the apartment or?
No, she was outside of the apartment and he was like standing in the doorway, like in the threshold. She started shooting, he hit the ground, and I started running toward him. And she told me, like, basically back off. So I stopped and I ran to the neighbor's door and I banged on the door, called 911. She went back into the apartment, so I went back into the apartment because I'm just trying to figure out what is going on. Like, why is this happening? So I'm, screaming naturally, why is this happening? What's happening? Why are you doing this? Well, at some point I got on the ground, and I can't remember if I got on the ground immediately, but I was on the ground and I was kind of hovering over him, kind of in my mind. I'm like, let me cover his head, so he doesn't get shot anymore. And, she was yelling at me to move, and I wouldn't move. So I got shot.
Latasha had produced a handgun, and gunfire erupted. Investigators later determined that multiple shots were fired. The attack happened incredibly fast. Far too fast for anyone to react. Far too fast for anyone to stop it. Brodus Perry was struck multiple times. Tabitha was wounded as well. And according to testimony, one statement was allegedly heard during the chaos. "You broke my heart."
You broke my heart. So I'm going to purchase a firearm. You broke my heart. So I'm going to purchase ammunition. You broke my heart. So I'm going to take that gun and the ammunition and drive 3 hours away to your home. You broke my heart. So I'm going to knock on your door. You broke my heart. I'm going to sit there and talk with you and your wife for about 20 minutes. You broke my heart. So I decide to leave. You broke my heart. So I'm going to shoot you and kill you in your doorway. And along the way, shoot your wife. But it's okay, because you broke my heart.
And after the investigation came the trial. A trial where jurors would hear explosive allegations about secret relationships, manipulation, emotional dependency, and competing versions of reality. And perhaps most surprising of all, the jury would ultimately reject the charge prosecutors wanted most. When the trial finally began in late 2025, there was one thing everyone already knew. Latasha Daniels was the shooter. That wasn't really in dispute. The evidence was overwhelming. She had been found at the scene, the firearm had been recovered, and multiple witnesses and forensic findings connected her directly to the shooting. So the defense wasn't trying to convince jurors that someone else pulled the trigger. Instead, they focused on a different question. Why did it happen? And more importantly, what was happening inside Latasha's mind when she pulled that trigger? This is where the trial took a dramatic turn, because rather than focusing exclusively on the shooting itself, both sides spent a significant amount of time examining the years leading up to it. The courtroom effectively became a place where Brodus Perry's private life was placed under a microscope. And what emerged wasn't the image many church members remembered. According to testimony and evidence presented by the defense, the relationship between Brodus and Latasha was far more complicated than prosecutors suggested. The defense argued that this wasn't simply a case of a woman becoming obsessed with a pastor. Instead, they claimed Latasha had been emotionally manipulated over a long period of time. According to their argument, she wasn't just dealing with heartbreak. She was dealing with years of emotional dependence, conflicting promises, secrecy, and confusion. Whether jurors accepted all of those claims is impossible to know. But one thing became clear very quickly. The defense intended to put Brodus Perry's behavior at the center of the case. As testimony continued, jurors were introduced to evidence that painted a picture of a relationship hidden from public view. Messages, videos, conversations, and allegations that stood in sharp contrast to the public image of a respected pastor. The defense reportedly highlighted instances where Brodus allegedly presented different versions of reality to different people. According to their argument, Latasha believed she was part of a meaningful, long-term relationship. a relationship that was eventually going to be acknowledged openly. Meanwhile, others appeared to know nothing about it. The defense wanted jurors to understand how deeply invested she had become emotionally, not to excuse the shooting, but to explain the mindset they believed contributed to it. And judging by reactions inside the courtroom, some of that testimony appeared to resonate. Observers later noted that certain jurors seemed visibly emotional during portions of the proceedings, especially when hearing details about the relationship and its alleged impact on Latasha's mental state. For Latasha, the stakes couldn't have been higher, and when she began speaking, she offered jurors her version of the story, a version that differed significantly from the prosecution's narrative. According to Latasha, the relationship with Brodus wasn't a brief affair. She described it as something that became deeply significant in her life. She testified about the emotional bond she believed they shared, the future she thought they were building, and the pain she experienced when that future appeared to collapse. She also described the message she claimed to have received on the day of the shooting, the message that allegedly ended their relationship, the message that disappeared almost immediately because it was sent through an app designed to erase conversations. According to her testimony, reading those words triggered an emotional crisis unlike anything she had experienced before.
You did it because you thought he deserved it.
No, I love Brodus. I would have never intentionally hurt him. No, ma'am.
You did it because he broke your heart.
No, ma'am.
No further questions, y'all.
It wasn't going anywhere. Like I said, he was not giving me eye contact. So I knew, or I felt like he had changed his mind. And I just didn't want to keep sitting there feeling, at that point, stupid. But he refused to walk me out. So Tabitha opened the door and was walking out. I was still trying to get him to walk me out. And as I reached into my pockets to get my keys, I remember being outside the door, and then the next thing I was standing in their kitchen.
Do you deny that you shot Brodus Perry?
I do not.
Do you deny that you shot Tabitha?
I don't, but I know it wasn't intentional.
Did you mean to shoot Tabitha?
No, I wasn't trying to hurt anybody.
When you went to that apartment that day, did you intend to use your gun on either Brodus or Tabitha?
No.
Why did you drive to Memphis?
I drove because I just wanted to see him.
Why?
I wanted him to explain why he did that.
Did you hope he would say, we can be together?
Yes.
Did he give you that hope when you went to the apartment?
He did.
Did he yank that hope away?
He did. As he often did.
Again, prosecutors challenged portions of this account, but for jurors, the testimony offered insight into how Latasha viewed the events leading up to the shooting, whether they agreed with her interpretation or not. The defense also emphasized her mental state on the day of the crime. They argued that she was experiencing an intense psychological breakdown. According to their position, she initially intended to harm herself rather than anyone else. The gun purchase, they claimed, was connected to suicidal thoughts rather than a plan to kill Brodus Perry. Only later, according to her testimony, did she redirect her actions toward confronting him. This distinction was critical because prosecutors were seeking a first-degree murder conviction, and first-degree murder typically requires proof of premeditation, a deliberate plan to kill. The defense wanted jurors to see the shooting differently, not as a calculated execution, but as the tragic result of a spiraling emotional crisis. Meanwhile, prosecutors pushed back forcefully. From their perspective, certain facts were difficult to ignore: the firearm purchase, the ammunition, the drive across state lines, the arrival at the apartment, and ultimately, the shooting itself. To prosecutors, those actions demonstrated planning, intent, and responsibility. They argued that regardless of emotional circumstances, Latasha made a series of conscious decisions that led directly to Brodus Perry's death, and they wanted jurors to hold her fully accountable. As closing arguments approached, both sides had presented dramatically different interpretations of the same events. One side focused on premeditated murder, the other focused on emotional collapse and manipulation. Now it was up to the jury, 12 people, one decision, and a verdict that would determine how history remembered this case. The jurors retired to deliberate. The wait began, and when they finally returned, many people inside the courtroom were surprised by what happened next. Was this a calculated murder, a crime of passion, or something far more complicated? We'll break it all down in the conclusion. And before we move on, I want your opinion. Do you think emotional manipulation should ever be considered when determining responsibility for a crime? Or do actions ultimately outweigh circumstances? Let me know what you think below. After listening to days of testimony, reviewing evidence, and hearing two completely different explanations for the same tragedy, the jury finally faced the question that had been hanging over this case for years. What exactly happened on April 4th, 2019? And perhaps more importantly, what level of responsibility should Latasha Daniels bear for it? The answer would determine whether she spent the rest of her life behind bars or whether the jury believed the circumstances surrounding the shooting warranted a lesser conviction. After only a few hours of deliberation, they reached their verdict, and it wasn't the verdict prosecutors had hoped for. Jurors rejected the charge of first-degree murder. Instead, they found Latasha Daniels guilty of second-degree murder and reckless endangerment. For many observers, that distinction was significant. The verdict suggested jurors believed she was responsible for Brodus Perry's death, but they were not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the killing met the legal standard for first-degree murder. In other words, they found her guilty, just not guilty of the most serious charge. And that outcome immediately sparked discussion among people who had followed the case. Some felt justice had been served. Others believed the punishment should have been harsher. And still others viewed the verdict as evidence that jurors had been influenced by the complex emotional circumstances surrounding the relationship. The guilty verdict made that clear.
And are we sitting here today because of a mental health crisis?
Yes. To the Perry family, no words can express the pain that I feel, nor will it ever take away the pain that you feel. But I want to say to you that I'm godly sorrowful, and I know it doesn't take back what has happened, nor does it negate what has happened. But I want you to know that I am so sorry for the pain that I've caused you. To Tabitha, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. And I pray that all of you guys will forgive me. But please know, I never meant for any of this to happen.
In February 2026, the case entered its final major chapter: sentencing. This was the moment when the court would determine how many years Latasha Daniels would spend paying for her actions. Family members, friends, and supporters on both sides waited anxiously to hear the judge's decision. For Brodus Perry's loved ones, no sentence could bring him back. When the judge finally handed down the sentence, Latasha Daniels received 20 years in prison. According to reports, she will likely serve approximately 17 years before becoming eligible for release. For some people following the case, the sentence seemed appropriate. For others, it felt too lenient. But regardless of where people stood, the legal chapter of the case was largely over. To many members of the public, Brodus Perry appeared to be a successful pastor, building a promising future, a husband, a leader, a man of faith.
Hi, St. Mark. This is Bro P here with another segment of Me and Bro P. Hi, St. Mark. It's another segment of Me and Bro P. I'm here with Anthony Moore, a life group member, to talk about his life group experience. So, Anthony, tell me about life groups. What's been your experience so far?
But after his death, allegations emerged that painted a far more complicated picture. As we wrap up this story, one question still lingers. What if just one decision had been different? What if the alleged relationship had never started? What if the truth had come out sooner? What if someone had walked away before emotions reached a breaking point? We'll never know. And that's part of what makes this case so haunting. Because once events were set in motion, there was no way to undo them, only consequences. Do you think there were warning signs that could have prevented this tragedy? Comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more true crime stories as we continue to bring the untold narratives behind the headlines. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and always look a little deeper. This is True Crime Diaries, where every story has a pulse.